Hey guys, welcome to another After Effects tutorial. Today we're going to go over some camera tracking techniques and how to make your text or any image that you'd like to appear like it's physically in the scene. So here's an example of what we're going to create today. So as you can see, the camera moves forwards. This is just a drone shot, and the text moves towards the camera as if it's in the 3D space. So nice. So if we close that and head over to After Effects, so first of all I'm going to drag and drop my footage into the After Effects project panel over here, and now I'm going to drag and drop it onto the new composition button, and it will create a composition with the same settings as the original clip. So I'm just going to scrub to where I want the clip to start. So I'm going to say around here, and I'm going to trim the clip down so it begins there, and I'm going to find the out point where I want the clip to kind of finish around here, and I'm going to trim the end. And now I'm just going to move the whole clip down to the start. I'm holding shift so it snaps nicely. So what we're left with is just our clip running through. So the next step we're going to take is to create our text. So we're going to go up to Layer, New Text, and I'm just going to make it drag this out so it lasts the duration of the clip that we're using. Double click it, and I'm going to call it Movie Title. Very creative. Cool. So we have our text, but it's not 3D tracked into the scene. As you can see, all very basic. So to jazz up our title text, I'm just going to show you a couple of techniques of how to edit your text and make it stand out a bit more. So I just went on Google image search and downloaded a grunge texture. That's all I entered into the Google search engine. So I'm going to go to my grunge texture, drag and drop it into the project panel, and now I'm going to drag and drop it just below the movie title in the scene and extend the clip, and there we have it. So what I want to do is kind of cut around the text into the, use the text layer like a stencil, so all we're left with is the grunge texture. If I was to cut around it, which I could do, and mask it, that would take an awful long time. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to use our toggle switch modes here to change this, so we've got more options. And I'm going to use a track matte. So I'm going to, with this is why it's important that the texture is below the text, so that I can press track matte and alpha matte movie title. So it's going to cut out all around the text, and we're left with that. So that's perfect. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit more flair to it by going to our layer styles. After right clicking the layer, Layer Styles, Bevel and Emboss, and I just want to make it look a bit more 3D so it stands out more. And I'm going to go down to our Bevel and Emboss settings, change the style to Emboss, increase the size just slightly, but also increase the depth, and just have a play around, see what works best with what font you're using. Cool. So I'm now going to close this arrow. Now what I want to do is I want to kind of merge these two layers together, sort of how you would in Photoshop. So I'm going to, holding shift, select both of the layers, right click, and hit pre-compose. And this will send them to their own sequence together. And I'm going to make sure this button here is checked, move all attributes into the new composition. And I'm just going to name it text layer. Hit OK, and now trim it, holding down shift so it snaps. And this is what we're left with, which is really cool, but still the text isn't being tracked into the scene. So our next step is we want After Effects to kind of analyze the clip and analyze the camera movement and create its own virtual camera relative to the text that's kind of copying the actual movement of the drone. So sounds really complicated, but After Effects does it all for us. So we're going to right click, track and stabilize, track camera, and that's all we have to do. So now it's analyzing away in the background. I'll come back as soon as it's finished. Cool, now that that's tracked, you can see all of these track points have appeared, and if I scrub through the footage, they kind of stick to the rocks and the things in the scene. So what I want to do now is, if you can't see these, by the way, make sure this render track points box is checked, because if it's not checked and we press off the layer, you can see they disappear. So I'm going to select back onto the layer, make sure this box is checked, and now using the mouse and the left click whilst holding Command, I'm just going to click about 4 to 5 different points spread throughout the scene. You'll notice I'm not selecting any of the points on the sea, because the sea is obviously the sea and the sea is going to move. We want to select stable objects that don't move throughout the scene. So for example, I wouldn't select a person walking if this was like a shot of a street. So now I've got these selected, I'm just going to hit Create Camera. And we can see on our layers, we've now got this 3D camera, but still our text is static. I'm just going to go ahead and select this layer and hide those checkpoints. So what we need to do now is just change this layer, this text layer, into a 3D layer. So I'm going to go back down to Toggle Switches, Modes, and under the 3D option, I'm going to check this box, and you'll see my title has moved. And if I go back to the start and hit play, it's now in 3D space. Cool. It's nice, but the problem is it kind of goes off the screen after just over 2 seconds, and that's not really long enough. Say I wanted it in the shot the entire duration of the clip, I need to reposition my movie title. So to do that, I can go down here and go onto my transform options, or I can just hit P on the keyboard with this layer selected. And here we've got our x-axis side to side, our y-axis up and down, and our z-axis for backwards and forwards. If I hold down Shift, it's far more responsive. And I'm just going to send this title back in 3D space, and I'm also going to move it up a little bit. I'm just going to experiment and see how that goes. Nice. I'm actually going to try and make the camera maybe go through the text. So if I go to about here, let's say I want the camera to go through the text here. Let's just play around with the positioning of the text. And let's play forwards. But now it's too high up, so maybe we won't have that. But with the right clip and the right camera movement and positioning, you can get that effect nicely. Cool. So now one last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to color correct this background layer, because at the moment it looks a bit flat. So I'm going to go over to the Effects and Presets tab. If you can't see that, just go up to Window, Effects and Presets, and type in Curves. And drag and drop it onto the layer. And now this lower end is the shadow, so I'm just going to make the shadows a bit darker by pulling it down, and I'm going to make the highlights a bit brighter, so that gives a bit more contrast into the scene. Now the final thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some motion blur, so the text blends into the scene a lot more realistically. So all we do for that is make sure under this motion blur tab that box is checked, and making sure that this box is checked, which enables motion blur for the entire scene. So now we've got this realistic motion blur.